Hi there, everyone. Evan here. Welcome to the very inaugural episode of Famous Last Words. So this is a concept I've been sitting on for a while now. Practically, I wanted to bring the human out in a lot of creators. We always see them talking about movies or talking about something else, but not much about themselves. And I think a lot of us have our own story to tell and kind of like what we're all about and what makes us us. And I want to be able to get that through. So at the beginning of the semester, I had an incident happen in my life and I got a lot of motivation. And this was something I've been sitting on was this podcast idea and how I wanted to do it and what way I wanted to do it. And it took a while, but now we officially have the time due to obvious reasons and we have the platform for it. Graciously, the PJ Campbell Network. Now, with that being said, I think we're just going to jump straight into things. Our very first guest of the inaugural Famous Last Words, we have PJ Campbell. Welcome to the show, buddy. How are things?
This feels weird to be on the other side where I don't actually have to host.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I feel about that right now. I mean, it's a nice feeling. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of relaxing. No, I feel the same way with the commentaries because like when we did Take 3 or even when I did my own radio show, I'm always hosted things, or I would even host the improv shows at my high school. And sometimes I would do things for the open mic nights like in Tallahassee. It's weird not hosting sometimes. It's just being in the back seat. You're like, what in the...
I get it. I do. I get it. So it's kind of nice to actually kick back a little bit and just try to enjoy myself. I actually don't have to pay attention to anything. It seems
I know it's kind of fun. So for a lot of people that are either gonna be watching this stream or not, whatever, we're definitely gonna be taking like questions, comments, because I really want to give PJ the chance and myself time to time to kind of show our vulnerability, kind of show who we are and things like that. And half the reason why PJ's on the first episode is to work out some of the kinks, try and figure out what exactly we want to do here. Because I have all the ideas on paper, but it's hard to execute, on camera for the first time,
You made it sound like my first marriage. Work out the kinks, figure out what works and what doesn't, and then we move forward.
We'll get there. So tell me, PJ, I think we're just going to jump straight into things. When the hell have you been doing for, I would say, the past 6 months at this point? Like, just wrap up your last 6 months.
So I'm living in Arizona now. Clearly, that was like a big change for me. I'm from California. I was like a 6th generation Californian or something crazy like that. So as far as I could remember, like my entire family lived in California, and I had moved to Los Angeles, and I got an opportunity to get a house and move down someplace where I could live a little bit more comfortably and have a little bit more fun and kind of like free up some of the constraints that I felt like I had in Los Angeles. Because in Los Angeles, as much as I liked being there, I love being with my friends. It's expensive, and you don't really always get a chance to do the stuff that you were doing that you'd like to be doing, I should say. Like, you think about it a lot, and it's like LA is supposed to be this cultural hub, but I never felt like I was actually doing any of the cultural hub things that you should be doing. Like, I wasn't getting a chance to go to any of the shows or any of the concerts or any of the, doing any of that, because I was working 40 plus hours a week at one job, then doing my stuff with the Schmodown on top of that, and really just trying to make ends meet. And, our side of the rent back when I was in Los Angeles was $1,800 a month. And that was for 2 people. That was not including what Alex was also paying when I was living with Alex. So, I mean, you can see where a lot of your money is already going to other things, and that's including trying to live. So I took it upon myself to try something new, and I moved down here, and I love Tucson, man. For what it's worth, like, it's weird to be in Arizona. Yes, absolutely. But it's got a very strong art hub kind of feel too. It's got a very college mindset, which I also like, but there's a lot of really cool culture out here. Like, they love movies in the same way that I do. There's a lot of really cool dive bars and stuff like that, because I like to drink. I like to go out. I like to have a good time. I mean, right now, obviously that's not happening, but I mean, there's always things like that, and just kind of finding myself again. That's what the last 8 months or so has been, is finding myself again.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because we didn't become good friends until, I would say, like the past 8 months. I don't know what happened in our paths and how any of that worked out, and we can jump more into it. But like, you and I really didn't get to know each other until the past 8 months.
like we knew each other, but not know each other. And that was
Yeah.
the thing, is like we spent time together and we'd talked and stuff, but it wasn't until the last 8 months where it was like, as my life shifted and changed, your life shifted and changed in very different ways also. And so
Yeah.
it just kind of became a point where we got to hang out and talk. And there's something about being vulnerable around someone who's also being vulnerable, and you start to feel like you can actually talk to each other about stuff. And I think that's kind of what did it, is you felt like you needed to talk to someone. I felt like I was needing to talk to someone who might have been outside of everything that was going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because at that moment of time, you and I were both out of each other's certain bubbles.
Right.
Like I wasn't in your bubble. We're getting closer now, which scares me. That's a different conversation. But we were out of each other's bubbles. And I'm really glad though that our friendship became a thing due to the facts that like it was about 4 months ago at this point. Like I had that major incident happen and you were like the one person that got it.
Right. And that's because I had been there. I was literally still dealing with something very similar, for very different reasons, obviously. So I think that there was definitely some sort of like kinship almost in that feel. And so it was a really good thing, I think, for both of us to like sit down and be like, how can I help you and how can you help me? And there's a lot of understanding that goes into that, because your friends who are, for both of us, I mean, I can say it, I'm now getting divorced, like I'm still in the middle of mine, and you had a relationship that ended. Your friends who are in relationships, they love you and they want to help you, but they're also happy and they don't necessarily know how to prop you up. Like Riley knew how to, because Riley had been divorced before. So Mark Riley was like by my side every step of the way, being like, here's the steps you need. Like, this is the stuff you can do. And I will, I can never thank Riley enough for that, because without someone like that in my life, I don't know what I would have been doing. And so you feel like there's someone who's there that really can like hold you up. And that's kind of what you were too, was that you were holding me up, but in a very different way.
Oh, for sure. I can speak. I get things for myself. I usually like to take a different approach to people when it comes to empathy, because a lot of people just have, oh, you're going to be okay. It's going to be fine. You got this. Don't worry about it. But I can also speak for myself. Sometimes people don't realize that, no, it's not okay.
Right.
And I always do my best to not play that role, but also play the, I get it. We've all been there, but here's how we can build from here. And I think,
well, and that's the thing. I mean, I think that we forget sometimes that it's okay to not be okay. And when people get weird about people not being okay.
Right.
And that's, I mean, understandably, you should be worried about people who are not okay, but also there's certain times when it's okay to not be okay. And you just need to accept that someone may not be at that time. And it's better to let them like work their emotions out and to be there with them in that time versus not, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. So I think we're going to pause this right now and we're going to move back. I want to get to know high school PJ a little bit. Because I've heard some stories. Not a lot of people have. I've heard some stories about you and how you used to describe yourself. And I'm the most curious because I would call you one of the nicest people in this general community, and it's interesting some of the adjectives and the way how you used to describe yourself. So let's paint the picture. It's freshman year of high school. What do we see in PJ Campbell in Northern California?
So Northern California, like 15-year-old, 14-year-old PJ Campbell going into high school is like that weird geeky kid that you guys always kind of like, and you kind of know he's always around, and he's awkward and he's still figuring himself out. But by the time the year is over, he's like the very stoner, metal heavy kid who could easily like end up in the backseat of a cop car. I smoked cigarettes fairly regularly all through high school. And I was just kind of a bad kid, like not in the way that
like a Breakfast Club kind of bad.
Yeah, like a little bit like Bender almost, but maybe with a little bit less attitude. That was kind of where I was. And it was because I was an only child. There was no siblings. There was no anything. And at that time, I could kind of just do whatever, because it wasn't that I was acting out. It was just I was kind of off to the beat of my own drum. And I grew up in a very conservative Christian household, and
Interesting to me.
eventually, depending on who you are, and I'm one of those people, I kind of rebelled and I broke free of that feeling, and I was okay with that. And it led to like really random adventures. Like I'll say it now. I probably never should admit this out loud. Before I had my driver's license, I drove all the way to San Francisco from Sacramento to go see Ozzy Osbourne and Ozfest down in like the Mountain View area. So I drove down there with people in my car with no driver's license to a concert 2.5 hours away. And
I have so many questions. Is that how the logistics of that? I want to imagine, like, first, how did you get a car in your possession like that? And two, who actually no, Ozzy was pretty big at that time. I can't hate.
Ozzy literally had released an album right around that time, which was part of the reason that was the year that Ozfest was free. And it was this crazy thing because the tour was free, and so we had gotten our tickets, and like it was a bunch of us, and we were like, screw it, let's go. Because in high school, I was basically listening to a lot of metal and classic rock. Like that was pretty much what I always only listened to outside of like Coheed, which leans like alt metal. And so I was trying to hit all these major bands and stuff that I loved before they'd get too old and they couldn't do stuff. Like, one of my favorite concert going experiences, maybe my favorite concert going experience of all time, was seeing the Rolling Stones in like 2004. And that was
before they got too old. That was before they got too old to put on like the best show, if that makes any sense.
No, totally. It makes complete sense to me. Mike K, real quick, and I know that you're supposed to be running this.
God, PJ, jeez.
But he said, do you remember who else was at Ozfest? And if I can remember correctly, Static X was one of the bands that was there. I want to say that it might have been there was a couple bands. I'd have to go back and look. And one of them was like a Norwegian prog rock band, and they all dressed up in costumes, kind of like Gwar.
Why is that not surprising? Like, why does that not surprise me that that's at an Aussie fest?
Well, I mean, it's Ozfest. It's exactly what you expect. Yeah. So, that was the kind of stuff you'd see. And the thing about that night, and it's funny because it's something that comes into play a lot for me now, is that night ended up being one of the last times that I spent with like my best friend in the entire world, where we were like one-on-one together, because he was 2 years older than me. And so he was graduating from high school and we weren't going to be able to hang out, and he moved to Monterey, and I would end up moving to Los Angeles like 2 years after that. And he ended up dying in a car accident. Like,
whoa,
long, like the month after I moved to Anaheim, he died in a car accident. So my first time back home after everything was for his funeral. And he and I went to that concert, and I will never forget, because he and I both love Ozzy. The finale that night was Paranoid, the Black Sabbath song. And it was like an extra long version of it. And he and I just were like going so heavy into like, just like rocking out and stuff. And it was just this mind-blowingly great feeling, and it was so much fun, and I'll never forget that. And then after we were leaving, this is such a weird thing, and that summer was the summer that the Simpsons movie was coming out. And so that summer, for pop-ups to help sell the movie and market it, they were doing they turned a bunch of 7-Elevens into the Quickie Mart. And so we literally stopped, and we were next to one of the 7-Elevens that they had turned into a Quickie Mart. And we went in, and they had literally gotten like Buzz Cola and done some of the stuff from the Simpsons.
That's incredible.
So we bought a bunch of Simpsons donuts and stuff, and some of the soda from the show, and left.
Right.
And so it's just like this weird thing that's always in the back of my mind, where I'm like,
oh, you froze. Did I freeze? Who froze? Okay. One of us froze. Sorry, guys, for it was PJ. So it's PJ who froze. Interesting. Sort this out for you guys really quick. PJ Campbell has gone haywire on us. And he was deep into this too. This is the sucky part. But anyways, guys, so far crazy stuff. Like 2 or 3 things I haven't heard about PJ yet. I think that's kind of my favorite stuff. Yeah, PJ did froze. Thank you so much, Kelsey. And yeah, Matt, I don't know where PJ went. I think he's gonna come back. I'm probably getting a text from him right now. Oh, PJ, is he here? Oh, there we go. He's back.
I'm not sure what just happened. That was a weird thing.
So I assumed I froze, and it wasn't me. However, we're back, and I think that's kind of all that matters at the moment. You were deep into it. The last thing that we heard was that, yeah, PJ just froze. The last thing that we heard was the Quickie Mart stuff. So, what about it?
No, man. So it's just a weird thing. Like, I just remember that whole feeling, and like, I don't know what it is about that entire trip, but like that has stayed and cemented me in so many ways, because it's also like just it kind of became who I was at that point, was just this person who would travel all the time to go see all these bands with his friends. And like I've seen Coheed and Cambria well over probably 20 times at this point. Like I really started doing that thing where it was like I followed music all the time. I was breaking rules and going out and just being a teenager. Like I know that we look back at ourselves and we're like, we were never as bad as the previous generation. It's like, no, we were screw ups too. Like we did all the same stuff. You know what I mean? Like no reason to pretend otherwise.
So something that Rocco Movies' Tyler was talking about, he said he was dealing with a breakup and it's still affecting his mindset a lot, and he just wants to say thanks. Which, yeah, we're gonna jump farther into it, but yeah, definitely so. I'm thankful for the community, but I do want to point towards that, PJ. Like, holy moly, what's cool and also mellowing about that is that like it's a really cool like last memory to have almost.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
I mean, I definitely saw him a few times after that, but it was more like it weirdly ended up being like our last hurrah in that kind of sense, because once he moved to Monterey, he was working and stuff, and I didn't get to visit him very much because I was still in school. So just a weird thing to actually, go through that.
Yeah, I think it's nearly symbolic in those cases, because I haven't had something like that happen to me yet, thankfully, but I can imagine that having those memories and having that specifically tied to you is so deepening and almost important to like tying something to a friend, Right. So from that, it's you graduate high school, you're some metalhead, probably a stoner too at this case. I could be wrong.
I cleaned up by the time I was out of high school. I had I'd almost completely quit smoking cigarettes at that point. I was still drinking. I'd been drinking since I was like 16. So, I'd had my fair share of like, I had done that, and I had friends who had gotten like deeper into the drug side of stuff. And I was like, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I should like stay the other direction. And I actually tried very, very hard to move that way. I mean, obviously now that if any of you know me, like weed and I go a long way. Like I'm going a little crazy because I'm trying not to go through all of my edibles right now because of the quarantine. So, I still dabble with that, but I mean, I had cleaned up a lot and I tried to do other things. I mean, I had long hair that went down to my shoulders in high school. I had,
why have I not seen these pictures yet?
Because there's not that many of them that exist. I wore torn jeans and AC/DC shirts, and I was just exactly what you kind of expect out of that person at that time.
It's definitely like, I don't want to say it's surprising, because a lot of the stuff that you love, from art, media, and just in anything in that case, you are deep into. Like you are so knee deep into some of this stuff. I'm like, how does someone do this?
Right.
And it's reflective of your past, clearly. So again, you graduate. And you decided to go into community college, right?
Yeah, for a little bit, and then I dropped out like almost immediately.
Right. What happened? Out of curiosity.
I started working. I like working more than I like going to school, and I had been working at Best Buy, and like I was one of those people who I kind of fell into working there, and I started working full time like almost immediately, which I had not expected out of high school, and I just loved the job, and I was making money, like good money doing it, and I meant that I could do things. I was getting vacation time, which meant then I could also travel, and who needed school when you could do that? And I mean, not everyone can do that. Not everyone can be like me and just decide that they don't want to go to school and that they just want to work and that they get lucky doing that. But I legitimately did. And so I just decided to run with it.
It's funny to talk about that. So Best Buy, what were you doing there?
I kind of worked all over the store by the time I was done because I had worked there for like 3.5 to 4 years. And Jacob was the one who had gotten me the job there. Like, funny enough, my friend, the one who had died. Yeah. So he worked for the company in Monterey, and he had like worked pretty well in that district and stuff. And so he was my reference coming in. And that was one of the cool things, was that I got to work there and I enjoyed it, man. Part of the reason I left was because by the time I quit the company, it was 2011, and it was like the November of 2011, and it was not long after the recession and other stuff had kind of been going on. And the company had moved away from actually trying to help people, in my opinion, and was more about trying to upsell people on stuff they didn't necessarily need at the time. And I didn't like that. That's not how I operate. Like, you know how I am. I try to help people. I believe in trying to help people. And so for me, I was just like,
we have Streamlabs. Go ahead and donate if you feel like it. I'm just kidding.
God damn. That's a good plug though. I definitely was like, oh, I enjoy doing this, but I didn't like feeling like I was screwing people over on stuff they didn't need. Like, it just seemed like at least for me, it just felt very unseemly, specifically at my store at the time. So I was just like, no, I'm good. And I started working for Disney. And so that was once I was.
How quick was that transition?
I mean, almost overnight, because I took my job from Best Buy with me to Southern California. Worked at a Best Buy in Southern California for like less than a couple of weeks, and I just started
living with at that point.
Myself.
Oh, so you got an apartment knowing that you wanted to be in SoCal?
Yeah.
Why did you want to be in SoCal then?
Because I wanted to work for Disney, and I just wanted to move. I love the scene. I love Los Angeles. I don't necessarily love everything about it, but I had always wanted to work for Disney as far back as I could remember. There was two things I wanted. I wanted to live in New York, and I wanted to work for Disney, and I was going to make one of the two happen one way or another. And so working for Disney ended up being the easiest. And so I moved to Los Angeles, and I made that happen. And I worked for Disney in the theme parks for 4 years. I loved working at Disney.
So yes, what were you doing there? Like, what was your?
I worked attractions.
Do a lot of things. You did what?
I was working attractions. I was a trainer in the attractions for a good while. I worked the Fun Wheel and the swings before they were changed to Pixar Pier. So it was still the Fun Wheel at the time, and it was the Silly Symphony swings. And I worked at California Screamin' when it was still California Screamin'. I worked the Little Mermaid. I worked World of Color. I loved working for Disney, and I got to be a trainer. I worked up my way to have like a leadership type position, which was really, really cool. And I learned a lot working for that company. I worked for Disney when they bought Lucasfilm. I was working the day they announced that they had bought Lucasfilm, and I will never forget being there, realizing that we were getting a new Star Wars film while I was still working for the company, and how weird that was.
Yeah, I can imagine that. So I remember I worked at Busch Gardens, Tampa Bay, for a while because you need a summer job to pay for that next year's of food at school or whatever. Right. And I do have to say, those places kick your ass.
They do, man.
When you go in to put in your shifts, you put in your shift.
Totally.
There's no half-assing that at all. So and I guess there's a place and a point where you departure from Disney, obviously, but like, I can't say also working in a theme park, obviously not one as big as Disney, but like, as much as you hate your job, you love it at the same time too, because you realize where you are and what you're doing. You're like, It's like a really toxic relationship that you just don't like. Not that you can't get out of, but you don't want to get out of it.
Right. And that was actually my breaking point when I worked for the company. Is I finally got to a point where when the bad days started to outweigh the good, I decided it was time to go. Because I've seen cast members who get jaded and hate working there. And I think that they hurt people in the process because you don't give people the experience that they deserve to have at that point. And so I was like, no, I don't want to be that person. If I'm going to be here, I want to give 100%. And so if I don't feel like I can give that, I don't want to, I don't want to hold anyone back.
Yeah. No, for sure. But it's glad you realized that. And I think if I had were there for a little bit longer, I probably would have at Bush. I probably would apply to be at another higher position, so I could have more to do there, if that makes sense, versus just saying next, probably some type of leadership role, or I would have driven myself insane because a lot of repetition in places like that, and you can only do it for so long.
I don't disagree at all with you on that. And so it's just a weird thing, man. Like, I loved working there, but like I said, there comes a time eventually where it's time to go, and you need to, you just do, because there's just something to be said about it's not worth wasting your time in the end, not because you're not wanting to be there, but just you don't want to bring other people down.
No, of course not. And so we go from there. At what point do you enter the Schmodown community? Is this after you get your job at the hotel, or is this before?
No, it's after. It's actually quite a little bit after. And
interesting. Okay.
There's a whole side to this story that basically while I was working at Disney, I was also doing blogging and podcasting on the side. Right. And I've been in this community now for the better part of a decade. Yeah, about a decade now. And around the time that I met Christian and Rocha, it was probably 2017, I want to say. So
I might have joined the community at the same time.
Yeah, I'd always followed them because when they popped off, it was at the very beginning of the boom of the blogging and the podcasting and things like that.
2012-ish. Somewhere around there is when it somehow blew up.
Yeah, and so along the way, I'd met them at different times in my career. Like when I went to my critic screening for The Hobbit, not the Desolation of Smog, the Battle of Five Armies, I literally ran into Mark Ellis in the restroom. And at the time, I didn't know how to respond, but I literally ran into him and I was like, I know you. And so
don't know me, but I know you.
Right. And he was, he's Mark Ellis. He's still very gracious and very nice to me. I don't even know if to this day he remembers that story, but he 100% is part of the reason that I wanted to be a part of the community, because I liked Mark's optimistic point of view. It was the thing that I always tried to bring to stuff. And so
I do have to say, I think it's funny, looking back and, we'll bounce back and forth, but when I first went to Atlanta and met everyone, you really get a general sense for what the community is, for better or worse. But I can say Mark Ellis is easily a standout dude. You don't have to approach him. He will approach you. And one of those scenarios where it's you don't know me, but I know you, but I'm going to make this easier on you.
Right. And so that was kind of that situation. And then as the years went on, as I kept kind of working in the space, I would meet other parts of the Schmoes Know group. Yeah. And I think it must have been the back end of 2016 and the beginning of 2017 is when I finally officially met Christian and Rocha. I met them. It must have been 2017. I think it was that January, because I met them of all things, was the critic screening we had of Triple X, The Return of Xander Cage. Hey man, that movie's not good, but I enjoy the shit out of it because it is.
Yeah, it's not surprising.
It's not surprising. But regardless, so I met them there, and I started doing after shows at the Stream, which was the studio where the AMC Movie Talk used to host out of.
Right.
And they have a studio space that was rented out by, I believe it was WGN at the time, because Makuga was hosting after shows there for a WGN show, and he and I would meet in passing. And so somewhere along the way of me coming in, I had met Christian and Rocha, I had met Ellis, I'd met some of the others, but Makuga and I started to have an actual relationship because we see each other all the time. And he loved Kirk, my corgi, because I would bring Kirk with me to the studio because the people at the studio loved him. So Kirk, a lot of the time, if you ever go back and watch those after shows, sometimes he would like pop up on screen because we just let him run around and just be in the studio. And it was kind of great. And so Makuga eventually was like, hey, you should come out. And so he was like, you should come to one of the tapings. And I did. And it was literally the day before the first free-for-all taping. And so I went to the old studio to watch them tape. And as I was leaving, Christian goes, hey, so you're going to come back tomorrow, right? And I was like, what's tomorrow? He goes, oh, we're doing the free-for-all. You should be here. And I was like, what's that? And he goes, well, this is the thing. And he tells me what they're doing because we had never done a free-for-all at that point. Yeah. And I was like, cool, I can do that. And I totally couldn't because I had my job the next day. So I called out of my job and went to the taping. And that is the day that I met Kalinowski and Jay Washington and Sam Levine and Hector Navarro. I literally met everyone that day. And from there on out, I have literally been in this community ever since.
I do think we should rewind a bit because there's sadly in a very integral part of the story that I think ties a lot of loose ends together almost. You can't erase history, sadly. When did you first meet your ex-wife?
Working at Disney.
And what year was that?
She started like the year after I did. So was the 2012 when we originally met.
Okay. And then you guys started dating
somewhere along the way. A lot of stuff happened that kind of transpired at that time that I don't necessarily want to talk about that led to everything.
No, that's fair.
But we definitely, like we had met in 2012, we had become friends and we had hung out and spent a lot of time together. And eventually we started dating and, people grow apart and things happen. And I understand that. And that's just kind of life. I don't have to be happy about it, but I don't have to be sad about it. Like you know that things in life change, stuff happens, people move on. And that's unfortunate, but it's true.
No, I just do think it was a little critical might be the right word to use to like figure that out, that through line out while all this is happening, because from my understanding, I could be wrong. She was with you for a lot of this, like, one-on-one for a while, especially involved in the community. And especially Kirk and stuff too.
Right.
So then, we have all of that. And then 2017 and now you're with all the schmoes. You're with everyone. Schmodown stuff, Collider, it's all there. And you're deep within the community. What do you think you could say that moment you realize? I would say post free for all, because you're there, but what moment do you realize, oh, I'm a part of this community now? Like I am actually like friends with all these guys.
So I think it must have been that December when we shot Spectacular that year, because it must be that spectacular. I think that I'm actually on camera towards the beginning and Emma's interviews me. And they make this joke about how I'm the one fan who's seen more tapings than anything at the time. And I was always around, and like they all kind of, it became a thing that eventually, and like to Christian's credit, he said this, is that there was a time that I came in and I was a fan and I was just there and they liked having me there because the vibe was we started bringing more fans in. It's where I met Alex Barzonia. And we tried to give it a studio audience feel, but eventually it became, everyone there saw me way more as just a fan. Like I became family with them because we'd all go out, we would spend time together, and it became much more than that. And so by doing that, part of the thing I was trying to do was help where I could. So if it was helping with questions, if it was helping with travel, like over the last year, that was part of what I was doing, was helping us specifically with travel. And just various things around the studio. I've worked tirelessly in the best ways to try to make sure that the ship continues to run however Christian needs me to. I love this game so much, and I always tried to give it at least 110% because I feel very lucky to be in the space and to be able to be a part of the show. And I don't want to give it less than that because again, it's kind of like what I was talking about with Disney. I always wanted to be there, but when you feel like you can't give anymore, eventually something has to give. And I don't want to be the one who has to. I love this too much because I love everyone involved. And I don't want to, ever half-ass what I'm doing.
Yeah, we can get into this later too, but like you and I love the people. Like
yes.
a lot of the people, especially like Atlanta proved this to me. It was my first outside of Celebration, which was a little different because 16-year-old Evan had a lot on his mind then. Like Atlanta, which was I want to say like 2 months ago at this point, or even like 6 weeks, barely even that. You really got to see everyone, and you really got the idea of, oh, we're all a part of this, but we're all a part of this because of the people around me.
Right.
And we're gonna bring up some people later when we make some announcements. But like there were some specific people, and this goes for you too. They'll come to you,
right?
They're like, you're this guy. I'm like, I guess so. I'm just me.
Well, it's funny because I forget about it sometimes. Like, every once in a while, like if anyone watching this watches SEN, like they've definitely talked about me on the show about how optimistic, how much they love having me around and things like that. So people in the community know me, they hear my name. So it's always weird now if like we go to the bars after these live shows and stuff and people in the bar are like, you're PJ. It's really nice to meet you. Like, thank you for the work you do. It always, it's humbling, but it also feels strange.
Oh yeah. Dude, it's so weird. I had this guy come up for me in Atlanta from my Take 3 days, which those are a different beast. That was a different person, then much different.
Right.
Yeah, I remember you from Take 3. I'm like, what? Sorry, excuse me? Yeah, you're the guy from Take 3 Productions. Like, yeah, I guess so. And he was like, I loved your stuff, man. I'm like, thanks. I wish we started this then during Atlanta. So be like, how about you check out this?
Well, I mean, at the time we had started kicking the idea around, it was a thing that, here, the truth of the matter with this channel, like real quick, is that anyone who listened to the Knapsack Files last year when I was on Ken's podcast, I had hinted at the fact that we were working on something. I wanted to create a network with shows because we had already started talking about it. And then my life went into upheaval. And then I moved here, and it took a little while for me to kind of rebound mentally to a place where I thought I could do this kind of stuff again. Yeah. But on top of that, it literally took the world to stop for all of us to be able to sit down and be like, well, what can we do to make content? What can we do to do this again? And that was the thing.
Yeah, especially in a world where everything is online, you don't have that chance just to sit down for an hour and get it all planned out. That is half the battle. Half the battle, especially when creating any content, is planning it out. The other half is doing it. But doing it and what we are doing, it's not hard. Something that the great Jay Williams of Sight and Sound once said, if you think podcasting is hard or you have that idea, get that out. It is not. You don't need much.
No,
just do it.
And that was the thing. Like, actually, like for everyone watching, we were literally filling out a schedule before this call and before doing this video. We were literally setting up the schedule for what we want the rest of the channel to look like moving forward. So these are things that we are literally working on because we care about trying to put out quality content. That's the hardest part of this job. The rest of it is fun. Like, I get to sit down and watch movies with you guys throughout the week. I hang out with my friends. We do these one-on-one talks. We do the PJ Campbell show. Like, we do all this stuff that is fun and easy, and it takes an hour and a half to 2 hours out of your day if you have the time.
I even have to say, like, on top of that, it's what's good about the whole development process and actually getting it tight is it takes off a lot of the time that we have on our shoulders, because I'm fairly busy still. Don't get yourselves confused. Like, online school is rough, and I know you are very busy right now due to some things that don't think have been officially announced yet.
Right.
But half the battle is the second you scheduled it out, your time actually opens up. It's just getting that schedule done.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump ahead on some of the stuff that we're working on just because, until it's officially announced, I never like to announce things just in case things fall through. Because
that's why
I've definitely been that guy where I've been like, these are all the things we're going to do. And you lose track of time and you're like, these are not the things we're going to do. Yeah. But I mean, this time I feel really strong. Like, we've set very concrete plans and I'm very excited about it. Yeah. I mean, we've figured out, and I can tease this, we've basically figured out the next 2 months worth of watch alongs. And that includes an extra night now that I'm very curious how that's going to go and how people are going to take that, because
one or two extra nights.
Well, one extra night of watch-alongs a week for now.
Oh yeah, sorry.
And, yeah. So there's some, we're doing some extra stuff along the way that maybe we didn't necessarily have originally planned, but we're going to do it anyway. And there was your show. We were trying to get that done. We're trying to get Chris Clark's Suddenly Soundtrack stuff off the ground, and that was pretty much officially
done.
He made the
Check
announcement.
out the PJ Campbell Network Facebook group.
Yeah, so I mean that stuff is all there. We're tirelessly working on trying to bring it together, but that also means that once it's kind of scheduled out, I can breathe and you can breathe and we can go do other things.
But yes, but also I think we'll come back to this because we still have a lot of time on our hands. I don't plan on taking up a full 2 hours or even an hour and a half, just when things feel right. I think that's the beauty of this show. There can always be a part 2, a part 3. Who knows?
Real quick,
I do want to bring up Michael K's point. Excuse me, PJ. He said at one point, both Brooklyn events confirmed for me how great the Schmoedown community is after meeting people in person for the first time.
I'm also going to shout out Matt Beer, who gave us $2 on our Streamlabs.
Oh, wow.
And wanted to say that he is excited for tonight's show. So I just wanted to shout out Matt Beer as well for tossing us a little bit of money.
Actually, yeah, I really do actually appreciate that.
I really do.
It pays for the StreamYard and how good all this can look and how we can make the blue on PJ's shirt pop out from those graphics. But actually, I really do appreciate that, man. Thank you so much. And yeah, to Michael K's point, as much I do want to say that, I do have to say a couple of things. My goal is to be as vulnerable and open in the show as possible. It also shows that the Schmoedown community isn't unoriginal, though. It still has its problems. It still has its flaws. Far and none. I hate acting like it's a great, perfect thing when it's not, But to that point, a lot of my friends I've met through this. So I can't not be appreciative for it or thankful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lean on a lot of that more out of I don't want to point fingers or name names or talk about stuff that happens.
I wouldn't.
But like anything else, I mean, any community has its own issues, and I think that that's a fair assessment. But you know what, man? Like the best of the best always ends up at the top. And I think that like Mike K and I hung out for quite a bit while we were in Brooklyn, and I had a great time when I finally got to meet him. Like we were drinking at the bar and we had a really nice time. Mike is honestly one of my favorite supporters of this channel. And I literally mean that because he's been in every watch along with us. He's always very appreciative and very excited when we announce things. Like, what a cool thing. What a very cool thing, especially in a world where there's, so much content that you could take in from literally anywhere. That's a lot. Like, that means a lot to me.
Yeah, and even on that topic, and people like Mike, and even Mike specifically, him and I have been friends in this space for 3+ years at this point. And I know, like, not if I need anything, or if I just wanted to talk to someone or just poke fun with, I can always go to Mike. And that's not his role in this community per se, but that's just who he's been. And he's been someone who's been really kind and really fun. And now that more chances are opening up for me to travel due to some things that are happening in my own personal life, I'm really excited to meet a lot more of these people like Mike. I really want to meet Christina Farrow. Just a bunch of these names that I know and I've talked to, not constantly, not every day, but enough where I'm like, I really want to like actually get to know you a little bit. It's going to become more real, And I think I think that's what I'm most excited for.
No, and I get that. I mean, it's part of the reason that the quarantines drive me absolutely bonkers. I mean, I was talking to Christian earlier in the week because he and I were talking about some of the exhibition matches and stuff that we're working on right now for the Schmoedown, and he and I were both like, man, we should have all been seeing each other over the last couple of weeks. Like, it just feels weird that none of us get to see each other. And I miss that aspect right now because I miss my friends. Like, I miss seeing everyone and the traveling of it all, because I have seen more of the country and met more people through this show over the last 2 years than I've traveled probably in my life.
Yeah, for me vicariously living through your Instagram stories. I don't know whether I should thank you for that.
You're always welcome. You're always welcome.
But you're not wrong, and there's times where I was like, I am ready to go, just haven't had the chance. Anyways, though, PJ, a couple of things. what have you been doing to keep yourself sane through this quarantine?
Well, before this, I'm really sad because one of the things that I started working on when I got down here was I started working on myself, and you had started to bring it up while we were in Atlanta. You were talking about how much weight I had lost, and I was loving that I had been going to the gym and like actually spending time like working on myself. I'm actually down an entire shirt size, which has been amazing. I have ordered so many Fright Rag shirts. It's ridiculous. It's going to be my entire wardrobe by this time this is all over.
Gamers. Yeah.
I'm just saying, man, I freaking love my horror movies. So to have all these horror t-shirts and stuff has been amazing. But I'm doing what I've always kind of done. I keep to myself. I watch a lot of television. I go out and I run and I spend time with my dogs. I hang out with Ryan. We do podcasting on Movie House a little bit and, just keep living the dream as best I can. I mean, if one generation was set to survive all of this, it was us. I play a lot of video games and I've gamed more now in the last couple of months than I have in a long time because I've had the time to do it. And now the quarantine's giving me even more.
I definitely do think though there's a lot of positive and negative repercussions coming from this. The positive, obviously this here, what we have going on at this moment, the ability to actually take in a lot of more content. I know personally speaking, I got stagnant watching film just because things have happened and like you lose time and you lose track of time.
Right.
But this has got me watching more film and things like that. But also, man, some days I just want to go outside and scream into a void.
No, totally. And I think it was yesterday. Yesterday was the hardest day for me. I had a hard time even getting out of bed. Like the thing is I don't think I've really made it any, I have really bad anxiety. And I don't think I've ever really hid that from people. I've been very honest and very upfront with that. Like I deal with anxiety and I deal with depression. And a lot of it stemmed from, I'd already had some of those problems before, but I mean, it was exacerbated for over the last 8 months. I've finally come around and I'm like peaking back to like how I felt before all of this. And I'm actually probably happier now than I've been in a long time. But there are some days during this quarantine because I can't just go out and do the stuff that I would normally do. Like I can't go to the movie theater. I can't go to the bar. I can't go hang out with my friends. I can't go get a slice of pizza just, and walk around the campus down here. So it's just a weird thing. And it just feels strange. And so there's some days where the anxiety and the depression hit hard because you're like, everything I'm doing is wrong. Like I'm not doing enough with my life. And you sit in bed and you're like, I don't even have a reason to get up because you literally aren't doing anything. And it's a weird thing to feel because normally I'm like, I can get up and no problem. But some days with all this, man, it can be very heavy and it can really can crush down on you.
So just really quick, we are kind of getting towards the tail end of the show. We still have some things to discuss, but if you guys want to drop in some questions, now is the perfect time. Get to know PJ more. Get to figure out who this man is, because sometimes I barely know. Like I said, there's some things I literally just learned about him right now that I didn't expect to learn. So go ahead, please drop some questions. There's some things that you guys are thinking of that I don't, and we'll kind of close out what we're going on here and what we're rolling out for. But yeah, quarantine's just been weird. My biggest issue with it is just like the lack of, there's a lot of people that I've had now the opportunity that I want to go meet, but I can't.
I get that too, man. Like I literally can't go out to do things in the way that I would love to, because it was funny right before all this really, really started. We had set up this idea because I live down in Tucson with Tim Franco from the Schmodown, if people watching know who Tim Franco is, and Dan Brunner and Aaliyah Moore, who used to do All at the Belts podcast.
Great people.
And they're all amazing. And so we all spend a lot of time together out here. And one of the things that we were going to do was anyone who has paid attention to my timeline knows that, like, especially on Twitter, I kind of go through phases of stuff that I'm watching. Like if I'm using GIFs from certain things, it's because I'm watching a ton of like How I Met Your Mother or whatever. But one of the things that I was on a kick for a little bit was I had gone back and I had rewatched Grindhouse, and I was like on this super Grindhouse kick. And Grindhouse is one of my all-time favorite films because I think it's such a cool throwback to a lot of movies that we just don't make anymore. But also, I was one of the people who saw that multiple times in theaters when it came out, and it was supposed to be a trilogy originally. Well, the movie bombed, as we all know, and the trilogy never happened. So it was 10 years later for the 10th anniversary. Tarantino in Los Angeles at his theater, the New Bev, decided to finally program Grindhouse 2 and 3. And so he did a week-long run of Grindhouse on 35 millimeter, so you could go see it and see the movie again on the big screen, and he introduced it, which was amazing. And he even wore the shirt that he wears in Death Proof when he's at the bartender. So he came out and he's like, "Do you guys recognize the shirt? I love this shirt." And I was like, "This is the best." But on top of that, he had programmed what he would have called the sequels to that point. And it was Machete and Hellride and Machete Kills and The Man with the Iron Fist. So I bought all the movies, and we were literally going to have a bunch of movie nights of Grindhouse. And I was even going to find the trailers that he had programmed between them so we could do it. And then this happened.
You really just hate to see it, to say the least.
You hate to see it.
We do have him up here asking, what is your favorite drink?
It sort of depends. Like, if we're talking about what do I normally drink throughout the day, mostly just water, with some of the like flavor packet things nowadays.
Stay hydrated, please.
Because I'm trying to say, and Gatorade Zero a lot if I've been running.
Really?
Yeah,
I don't know how I feel about that.
It's literally littered through the office because I drink so much of it. But outside of that, if we're talking alcohol, my go-to is Disaronno. Anyone who has hung out with me knows Disaronno straight all the time is always my drink.
It's so funny. We were in Atlanta, and it's the only reference I have, sadly. It was the first night we were out at the bar after the Ella show, and everyone's left, but we have Finstock, Tom Daggino with us, and we have our good friend Dwayne, which I miss very much. Dwayne, if you're here, say hi. If you're not, then don't. But hi, Dwayne. And it was us four, and I guess they all wanted one more drink, even though at this point it was like 1 o'clock. and Tom goes, "PJ, what do you want to drink?" Disaronno. What's that? you get this moment from Tom. What's that? But you can't tell if he's messing with you. And it was great because for a solid 2 minutes, I hear PJ yelling Disaronno from across the bar. I'm like, "You son of a gun! If I have to hear this one more time, I'm gonna be so upset."
I mean, I'm just saying.
That was last night.
So, I mean, it's my choice drink, man. Like, it just tastes really, really good. It goes down smooth. I enjoy it very, very much. Yeah. It's hard to ignore that. I also like a good Baja Blast from Taco Bell from time to time. You know, when I decide to hate myself and eat fast food,
Mountain Dew isn't a drink. It's like liquid gasoline. It's awful.
Yeah, it's liquid crack. It's so terrible for you, and yet sometimes you can't help but have it.
My buddy Chris Mel was wondering what posters you have behind you on the wall.
So if you guys can see it, I can even shift it up just a little bit. Those are actually all Broadway window cards because I'm big into Broadway and musicals and theater. So if you guys can see it, that's Little Shop of Horrors. That's from like the 2000, like the mid 2000s run of the show. Then we've got Hamilton, which is right here. Aaron Sorkin's To Kill a Mockingbird, which had Jeff Daniels, and then Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. The Cursed Child one is signed by the entire cast. The playbill inside of To Kill a Mockingbird is signed by Jeff Daniels. The Little Shop and Hamilton ones aren't. And then there's actually some more along the side, but you can't see them. It's actually King Kong, which is signed by the cast, A Bronx Tale, which is not, Moulin Rouge, and School of Rock, which is signed by the entire cast as well. And if you guys actually go on to my Instagram or even my Facebook page, you guys can see like my entire house is basically kind of like a museum to film, and it's literally just lined with posters, like just movie posters.
I'm definitely not surprised by that. That's the least surprising thing I think I've heard all day. So we're gonna approach our last topic. I told you about this 5 minutes before the show. So you've had some time now to sit on it. Our great friend Chris Clark came up with these words, famous last words, for the title. And I realized it dawned on me today that I have to do something with this title And so we have we have our only real segment of the show, and it's gonna be your famous last words. What was a moment in your life where you had said your famous last words until something went to shit, for better or worse?
I keep thinking about this because I mean the obvious is like what's the worst that could happen, and I feel like
Right.
that's the obvious choice a lot of the time is like what is the worst that could happen? Like what happens next? What kind of things? To me, that always feels like it. I'm trying to think if there's anything in specific that I can come up with, but at the same time, at the back of my head, it's also always like the show must go on. So even when stuff goes badly very quickly, I'm also the kind of person who's like, we're just going to go straight through the fire and we're just going to come out the other side.
I remember you saying that a couple of times in Atlanta, due to some circumstances.
Yeah.
I would say from my experiences with you, when we were in Atlanta, you were drunk buying t-shirts.
Yeah. You tried to yell at me for that.
As a responsible human being, I remember. I think that their vivid words were, "No, this place is awesome. They're about to close, so I'm gonna buy these shirts."
Yeah,
and I think that's a good idea of your famous last words. Was you completely defending your drunk purchase of very expensive clothes that I think have.
I do have. They're in the other room. Actually, the sweatshirt is sitting across from me right now. Those were Famous Monsters is another one because, again, to the point it was kind of talking about earlier, like monster movies are my jam. Like you guys can see, I have the Godzilla Criterion set, like right there. I freaking love monster movies. So
you really do.
I really do. Horror movies and monster movies have been like my jam for the longest time because as far back as I can remember, I was watching movies that I shouldn't have been watching. Like I think we were talking about it the other day when we were talking about like our most memorable movie going experience at a young age. Mine of all things was seeing The Rock, the movie.
Right.
In like 96, I was 6 years old and my parents took me to see it in theaters. And it's such a weird thing because my parents never got a babysitter. I literally would just go to the movies with them and I would see stuff I shouldn't have been seeing. And that was 100% one of them. And yet I was 6 years old. I saw The Rock and I got ice cream after. So it's always played a like big part of my life. I think it's part of the reason I've always defended Michael Bay so hard on certain things. And so because of that, I just was always also watching stuff at home. In the horror films, especially when you'd like go to Hollywood Video and you'd see them like all lined up or at Blockbuster, the cover art for horror films was always super interesting back in the VHS days. So I'd always want to pick them up. And I kind of fell in love with it for that reason.
Right. So, one last question before we head out. Michael K wonders, what was the first movie that got you into horror?
There's a couple of them. It kind of depends on how you want to look at it because I can safely say that Gremlins was probably like a huge gateway because Gremlins is very much looked at as like a family film still to this day, which seems utterly bizarre when you think about it. Like that movie literally has these little monster things running around a town, killing people on Christmas. And yet we consider it a family film, which is, I'm not complaining. I grew up watching it a lot for that reason. So that was probably part of the start. But of all the things that I can think of, Day of the Dead was one of the very first horror films I think I ever saw.
Fun.
And
Fun.
Yeah, like I'm a huge George A. Romero fan, and Day of the Dead was the very first one I ever saw, and I love that movie. So much so that was actually one of my recent purchases from Fright Rags is that they had a Day of the Dead collection, and I really love that shirt. That movie is still so good. I actually rewatched all of them right as the quarantine started because I was like, well, what, with everything going on, watching zombie films seems like the obvious choice, right? And so
it's a little on the nose.
Yeah, so I watched 28 Days, 28 Weeks, and then all the Romero films, and it's amazing how well they all still hold up.
Right.
Even to a point, like I'm not the biggest fan of Zack Snyder, but I also rewatched his Day of the Dead or his Dawn of the Dead remake, and the Dawn of the Dead remake is actually very interesting because I think it actually has a lot of really good ideas too, because it's written by James Gunn. I think the script is much stronger than the direction of the film actually is.
Right.
And so there's a lot to be said about that. I think that comes from that. And that's why the best horror in my opinion. If you look at Jordan Peele, what he's been doing with Get Out and Us, or, you know, even the Conjuring films to a point, I think that the best horror is usually like the social commentary type horror.
Yeah.
Because there's something of a reflection. It's why the Twilight Zone to this day, those older episodes of the Twilight Zone specifically, the first 5 seasons that Rod Serling was like directly involved with, they still hold up, not because they're terrifying. They are, a lot of them are, but because they feel timeless and they feel like a mirror, and you watch it and you look at yourself and you're like, wow, like you see more of yourself than you probably should, or you see more of the world than you probably should. And that a good horror should do that. So for me, even Godzilla, like the original Godzilla was, you know, mostly about nuclear testing and like what we were going to do to the world, and look what we could create with it. And it creates a literal monster that destroys cities. I mean, now have we moved away from that? Yes, we have. But I mean, even to a point like Godzilla King of Monsters, which I know is very divisive within the fan base, but I really liked that movie because I felt like it was trying to even go as far as that, like sometimes nature needs to balance itself out. Like we screwed up the world, and now nature's just trying to balance itself back out. There was a little bit of social commentary about the way we treated the world and what we've done to the creatures in the world and stuff like that. So there's something to be said about that. And that's why I think I've always been drawn to it. So, you know, I keep going back to horror. I think that horror, even Jurassic Park, because Jurassic Park is horror to a point.
Oh, dude, Jurassic Park still scares me to this day.
Right.
Absolutely frightening scenes.
Yeah.
Absolutely frightening.
Jurassic World, even. Like, Jurassic World shows the other side of that coin of what happens if we were stupid enough to continue doing this. And that's kind of what I like about that movie. Like, I know it gets a lot of crap, and I'd even go as far as saying, as the one person in the world, I think, outside of Maxwell Haddad, who likes Fallen Kingdom.
Fallen Kingdom is good. It's good. It's good.
Fallen Kingdom is very good, and it even has a little bit of like, I believe that people would be stupid enough to try to weaponize creatures that they thought they could control. And there's something to be said about the idea of bigger companies and stuff trying to sell off animals as a weapon and trying to biochemically create a weapon. Like, there's a lot to unpack in that, and I love it for that. It's also a haunted house film with dinosaurs, and I love that.
So with that, PJ's little horror show, I think we're gonna bring the show to a wrap. An hour for our first show. I'm not too upset by that. It's kind of like what I was shooting for. Some are gonna go a little longer, some are gonna go a little shorter. But I'm really happy with how this turned out. With that being said, we're going to make a couple announcements here. I think I'm going to steer the ship on this because I have a cool idea. I just didn't tell PJ about it. However, we're okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different shows that are confirmed right now, that we have thumbnails for sitting in them. We're going to go through them in order. So come this Friday, we have 2 special guests coming in this weekend. But this Friday, we have the Showdown Inner Geekdom champion, Kevin Smets, doing a Tremors watch-along with us. PJ, you know more about Tremors than I do. How about you tell the folks at home what exactly Tremors is?
Well, funny you should talk about our love for horror in this podcast, but Tremors is maybe, at least to me, the last great B creature feature, and it was made as such. Kevin Bacon taking on a bunch of underground creature worms called graboids. It is a really fun series, but this first one in particular like lays the groundwork for what is to come, and it's just like such a throwback to 1990. It's a movie that I love very much. It's a movie that apparently Kevin Smets loves very much. He was so excited about it. He reached out to me when he found out that we were talking about doing it, and he wanted to be on, so we made it happen. And I'm going to consider this his birthday gift, and I cannot wait to sit down and watch this with him. And Frank has never seen it, so it's going to be even better that he, you, I, Hogue, Kevin Smets, we're all going to be together watching Tremors.
I haven't seen it either. I think you know that.
Yeah, I know.
And then we have the big announcement that I think that I'm probably most excited for. I was tooling around with PJ about this because I love music, and I got on a music kick again recently because we have time. We're going to be doing our top 10 albums of the decade, each of us. But we have a special guest, one of my good friends in this space, RB3. PJ Campbell Show Top Albums of the Decade, guest starring myself and Robert Butler III. I'm very excited for this. But PJ, how do you feel about this?
Number one, you 100% took over my podcast and my show to make this happen, which I'm not necessarily mad about, and that's okay. We will be doing this one Sunday night. It'll be 7 p.m. PST, 10 p.m. EST. That is essentially going to be all of our shows across the board right now. That is really what we've come to as a conclusion, is that it's easy for us, and I think it's easy for the audience if our times stay strictly the same across the board, except, for obvious exceptions, which could potentially happen. But I'm very excited about this one in particular because RB3 and I have gotten very close over the last couple of years, and he loves music and I really enjoy music. I don't listen to it nearly as much as I used to, though. So it's going to be very interesting to sit down with you and him and talk about the top albums of the decade, because I think we are going to be coming from very different places and there's going to be not a lot of crossover. And I think that's going to be what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I definitely think that a big reason that I wanted to bring RB3 on is because our first part of our friendship online came from through music. I think I said something on Late Night with Take 3 about music, and RB3 happened to be there, and he said something, and from there it just kind of took off, and that's how we became friends in this space. And I'm just really excited for this because we've talked about our lists, and I'm very curious to see people's reactions to them, especially yours. But I also feel like I could get more backlash from mine because of the fan base that we have, if that makes any sense.
It'll be interesting to say the least, because I know for sure, at least for me, there's a couple of albums that there's no way you guys are going to have. And I'll be curious to see the reactions because, I don't think it's going to be any big surprise, but mine leans very heavily on rock and metal.
Oh, for sure. Michael K does say that sounds exciting. So we've at least got K on board. So that must mean we're doing something right. And
I freaking love Michael K.
I just want to throw that Monday. That is fair. We all do. This upcoming Monday, we are doing a watch-along, of the 25th anniversary for A Goofy Movie. We talked about this. I think Michael K was the one who recommended we do this. Fun fact. We always try and do animation on Mondays. And A Goofy Movie, it's perfect. It lines up. How are you feeling about it, PJ?
This one I'm super excited about. This is a movie that I have loved for a very long time, since I was very young, and it's a movie that I think doesn't get a ton of love outside of very specific circles. So it's going to be really exciting to come back and revisit it now. And part of the thing that's so exciting is it's the 25th anniversary. But the other funny thing is, you guys might remember Max's best friend in that is PJ. That is where my nickname came from. My nickname in life came from this movie. So there's something kind of fun about that to me. And I just love this movie to death. I think the soundtrack and the score is just wonderful, and I'm really excited to revisit it.
So I know I've seen it, but I don't remember it. So this is definitely going to be a first-time watch for me. I'm going to count it as a first-time watch, because when you don't remember a movie, it doesn't really matter. Matt Beer says, yes, A Goofy Movie is the bomb, and he is correct in that.
I agree with Matt Beer.
Sorry for all the announcements. We have our next guest lined up for Famous Last Words. I didn't expect to have this guest so early, but we will be having Jacob Blunden with us, probably one of my really closest friends from Take 3 Productions, now halfway working with us all the way in Australia. I don't know how he does it. I'll be having him on because it had to happen this early because he's on break, which means he has to do it now or he will forever be working and I'll never have him on the show. So he always finds a way to do this where he just kind of to weasels his way into things. But I'm kind of excited. It's a lot. It's really interesting learning about a person who grew up in a totally different culture than you.
Yeah, I'm very curious because, the more I talk to him about stuff, because we're all very close, we talk all the time, we all hang out all the time via the internet, and there's just something about Australia that is so interesting to me, and I'm going to be very curious to hear about him growing up over there because, we didn't even talk a lot about my upbringing and stuff, which I would be curious to go back to eventually.
Well, it's why I like keeping them short. We talked about this before. I would much rather have a part 2 or 3 where we can have fresh ideas and fresh things versus we have a podcast for 3 hours that is just super boring.
No, totally. And I get that completely. But I'm just going to be curious to weigh his growing up in Australia to the way that we grew up here, because it seems very different. The entire country seems different. So I'll be curious to hear just kind of how that plays out.
Oh, for sure. So that kind of brings us to a close. Sorry for about like 90 minutes of announcements. But PJ, now's the time. Plug yourself.
If you guys haven't already, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at PJ_Campbell. I mean, obviously, it's just, right here, right underneath me. You can see it. Of course, if you haven't, please head over to Facebook and find the PJ Campbell Network Facebook group and the page. If you haven't liked the page, like the page. And if you haven't joined the group, join the group. We make a lot of announcements in there. As we said earlier, Chris Clark had announced that Suddenly Soundtracks is officially coming back. I think he said his first guest is Rachel Silvestrini, and they're going to be doing Disney soundtracks. I didn't have a graphic for it, so I didn't toss it in here. I apologize. And if you haven't already, you can also find us on iTunes, Spotify, and Podbean. There are audio versions of the show. Even if you guys aren't necessarily listening, subscribing, rating, and reviewing goes a long way for our shows to help other people find it. So if you could, subscribe to those and rate those on iTunes or whatever platform, you help us out a lot by doing that. And if you haven't, you can also find Movie House in those same places. You can also find it on YouTube. That is where Ryan Snelling and I talk about movies. There's a lot of other shows on there, but the Movie House main show is the one where I spend my time with Ryan Snelling and we review new movies, which right now maybe not happening as much, but we're finding ways around it to, bring you guys content still.
No, you both are very creative people. I do want to thank PJ Campbell for being on the show. I actually super appreciate it. Again, it's a pilot, you could call it. A lot of kinks to work out, but I definitely think that as the show went on, the show got better and better, and we've had this conversation. That's just how these things kind of go.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I get it. And you guys, if you have more questions and you want to find out more, feel free to send them to us, and Evan and I can put together to do another one of these down the line. And we can definitely talk about more about me, where you want to find out how, some of this stuff has played out in my life. Like, I have no problem talking about those things. We just didn't cover everything because there's a lot of ground, and there's so much
and the conversation just goes places sometimes.
Yeah.
So I do have to say, thank you so much for enjoying, guys. We had a really consistent viewership, and I have to thank you guys a lot for that. Really surprising. Again, we got a Streamlab. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Mike, Matt Beer. Mike A, thank you so much for being in the chat. I'd like to special shout out to my friend Chris Mel, who doesn't appear all here, but he came to support, and I really appreciate him for that. Again, you guys can follow me here at Evan DeGraff Live. Again, I made a Pixar list recently. Go comment on it, please. I want to make some stupid arguments about Pixar movies. And I'll be on here. I do watch-alongs. I do those things. It's Family Game Night, which is going to be upcoming this week. We were supposed to test something out. We're going to figure that out. We're supposed to be playing a really fun board game. We're going to do that for the people. And with that, I think we're going to say goodbye. Appreciate all of you guys for being here, and see y'all soon. Deuces.